church planter can walk 20 miles in a day. Give him a bicycle and he can go 3 times as far and be 3 times as effective. Well, it's good to be back together again as we're continuing our chronological study through the entire New Testament. Our study today takes us back into the heart of Matthew chapter 18. And this is a great chapter. There's a lot of different themes that surface within its verses, but one predominant theme that, is the majority of the chapter actually, is about children. Amazingly enough. And the first 6 verses all deal with children. Jesus is using a child as an object lesson for who gets into heaven and who's greatest in the kingdom of heaven, and warns against causing any children who believe in him to stumble and so forth. That's the first 6 verses. Jesus digresses for a while to talk about stumbling blocks, but then he comes right back to children. Look at verse number 10. Here's where we left off last time. Jesus said, "See that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I say to you that their angels in heaven continually see the face of my Father who is in heaven." And now a lot of us think, well, that's probably the end of that. He's been talking about kids for so long, and what else could he say? Because look, it seems like he changes the subject. He talks about the story of the man who leaves the 99 sheep to go find the one. But surprise, surprise, Jesus is actually still talking within the context of the subject of children. Because if you jump down then to verse number 14, read this with me, please. "So it is not the will of your Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones perish." So he's still talking about kids, and somehow the parable of the shepherd who leaves the 99 to go get the one lost sheep has something to do with children. And this is what I love about just reading through the New Testament verse by verse, because we read everything within its context then and get a richer understanding of what the Lord is trying to convey. So many times, perhaps you've found this to be your experience, you hear a sermon about the good shepherd who leaves the 99 to go search for the one lost sheep, and it's an evangelistic sermon, and it's used to portray God's great love for lost people. And I suppose, that's true, but I'm not so sure it's a legitimate use of this story when we look at it within its context. So let's read a few more verses here, okay, after verse number 10, where Jesus reveals that children have a presence among the angels in the presence of God, okay? Let's read the next verse, verse number 11. "For the Son of Man has come to save that which was lost." He just talked about kids. Now look at verse number 12. "What do you think? If a man has 100 sheep and one of them has gone astray, does he not leave the 99 on the mountains and go and search for the one that is straying? And if it turns out that he finds it, truly I say to you, he rejoices over it more than over the 99 which have not gone astray. So it is not the will of your Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones perish." And so the story in this setting, at least in Matthew chapter 18, about the one lost sheep, doesn't represent really a lost adult, and it doesn't even represent a lost child. It simply represents the fact that children are highly esteemed in God's eyes. And so therefore, as Jesus began in verse number 10 to say, "See that you do not despise one of these little ones," here's another reason not to despise them, because God places such a high priority on them. Okay, and so this should be a scripture that's a great boost to Sunday school teachers who are devoting their very valuable time to helping children understand the Bible. And since we're on the subject, let me say that it is not the Sunday school's a teacher's responsibility or sole responsibility to do that. It's primarily the responsibility of the parents to do that, okay? And we should value our children very highly based upon what Jesus has just told us, what we've just read here. They are comparable in God's eyes to a lost sheep whom the shepherd leaves 99 to go find. Again, I don't think the emphasis here at all is on the lostness of the children, because Jesus has already told his disciples just seconds earlier, unless you are converted and become like little children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Okay? So we have every reason to believe that children serve as an object lesson to all of us. This is what people look like who are on the way to heaven. Okay? Please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it'd be a sin to take what Jesus said about the story of the lost sheep and apply it to lost adults and so forth, because that is certainly true. And in other contexts where Jesus said this, I think it absolutely was true. But in this context, Jesus is applying that story to point out how valuable children are to God. As I said to you previously, there are cultures which I've traveled in where children they just don't seem to be nearly as valuable in the eyes of those cultures as they should be. They can be bought and sold and used and ignored and abused and so forth and traded and dumped off. And these are indications that the adults who treat them in such a way don't know God. Because those who are followers of Jesus, they want to obey all of his commandments. And what we read today are the words of Jesus just as much as any of the other words we've read or the commandments of Christ. And so this should affect us. We should take it very seriously. Okay? Verse number 14, it is not the will of your Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones perish. Again, in the context, I think Jesus is not saying that any children are lost, but as they grow up, if they're caused to stumble, they could ultimately be lost. Okay. All right. I'm looking forward to talking more about this. So I'll see you next time.
HeavenWord 7 is made possible by the financial support of viewers like you. Thank you.